Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. You may have heard the term biochar being used in gardening circles. Well, what exactly is biochar, and why is it being added to more and more soil products that you can find at the nursery? We're going to find out. Also, roof rats. They're not just for your attic anymore. If conditions are right, they'll invade your fruit and nut plants outdoors and in some instances move out there. We have control tips for roof rats and how they differ from other rodents that you might find in your garden. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Have you heard about biochar? We're going to be talking about a soil amendment that may save you a lot of money when it comes to fertilizer as well as improving the soil. What is biochar? How long has it been around? Let's talk with Milt McGiffin. He is an extension specialist down at UC Riverside who has been studying biochar for a long time. And Milt, let's talk about some biochar basics. What exactly is it?
Well, that's a good question. Biochar is produced by burning something that's high in carbon, usually some waste product. Only you don't exactly burn it, you make it into a charcoal. So when you make charcoal, if you burn a fire, you give it plenty of oxygen so that you get a lot of heat back and it burns quickly. When you do that, though, the fire will eventually go all the way to ash, and all that carbon that's in it goes off into the air as carbon dioxide. The trick to making charcoal is you starve it of oxygen. So when you do that, you're going to give it some heat, and you might do a little bit of burning to get the heat up. But you starve it of oxygen and you get a chemical decomposition of it so that you hopefully end up with something that's pretty much pure carbon. So if you're talking about what people think of as pure biochar, what they would give you as a description of it is basically pure carbon. So it's going to be sheets and sheets of carbon, very similar to graphite in structure.
And for the untrained eye, they might think it's charcoal.
Yeah, sure. It is a type of charcoal. Not all charcoal is biochar. But biochar is a type of charcoal. That's exactly right.
So basically, this is slow-cooked dead trees, if you will.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, they make it from sewage. They make it from all sorts of carbon. It's basically, you just need something that's got a lot of carbon in it. And then you need to go through the process we call pyrolysis, which is what I just described, where you're heating something with no or very little oxygen in it.
Biochar has been around for centuries. How did they do it way back when?
Probably Mother Nature's been making biochar for a long time. We just didn't see it that way. If you think about it, fire is a big part of our ecosystem out here in the West. The Midwest has very deep, black, rich soils. Some of that's because they had grassland growing there, but some of that's because the grassland burned and it went into a form of carbon that's persisted in the soil. So biochar itself has probably been around a long time. But then you invent the airplane and people start flying over the Amazon and you realize it's not this uniform sheet of green, that there's some places that are a lot darker and greener than others. And when they saw that, they then sent in some agronomists into the jungle and they started digging soil pits because, that's what soil scientists do, and started to look at the soil. The areas where they were dark green, you could see that they're black and that the soil's just black for like 6 feet down or more. If you dig in the other places where you didn't have this dark green, you got a typical tropical soil where it just has a very thin layer of topsoil and then it's, very light colored on down. So something had happened in those areas of the dark green. The natives had done something a long time ago. And the native peoples, what they'd done was they buried, they did slash and burn agriculture. So you've got a lot of, you slash down the trees, you put them in a big pile, and you try to burn them. Well, it doesn't burn completely because they're, it's wet in the Amazon to begin with, and you've got these green trees. So you basically went into pyrolysis with a lot of that. You made a lot of charcoal. And then they just incorporated that back into the soil. The Native Americans then died off because of the diseases, but they left behind that charcoal. And so those areas became overgrown with vegetation, as they're wont to do in the tropics. And the vegetation flourished in those particular places. So then when the soil scientists went down and dug in, what they discovered was that these were man-made, obviously had a lot of charcoal in it, and it was something that the natives had done, maybe 500 years or more, maybe even thousands of years before they had dug these pits to check it out. So whatever the natives did, it persisted for a long time, and it greatly increased plant productivity. And that's basically the origin story most people give for biochar. It turns out, though, that a lot of cultures have used charcoal in agriculture for a long time. There's even from 200 years ago, there's even a U.S. government publication on using charcoal in agriculture and all sorts of things. The Japanese have used it for a long time. It's been around. It's been used. We may not have understood it all that well, but we did have it.
As you said, the biochar improves the soil. It doesn't break down like compost or commercial fertilizers will. So from the aspect of the farmer who's looking to save money, there's a money-saving benefit right there. You're going to have a very nutritious soil at less cost.
Yeah, it should persist for years and years after that once you put it in.
What sort of soils would benefit most from an application of biochar? I would think that it would raise pH, so it would be most beneficial on a very acidic soil.
Yeah, the most obvious thing's an acidic soil. Now, biochar has evolved over time. At one time, there really wasn't much post-process, so you would just make charcoal and that was it. They basically sell you the charcoal. Now there's a lot of post-processing with it, so you can get biochar that's neutral or pH adjusted or what have you. And so for our soils, you can get around that. But as far as soil types here that are going to be improved by it, I would think a lot of ours are simply because they're low in carbon. That's always been a thing with us. And trying to raise the carbon content's difficult because most of the things we put in the soil don't persist more than a few months because it's warm and we water the soil and they just get chewed up by the microbes.
We're talking to Milt McGiffin, Extension Specialist at UC Riverside, about the benefits of biochar. But there may be some drawbacks. When we come back, the possible problems with using biochar coming up. I've told you about Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planters. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. They're BPA-free and lead-free, making them safe for growing vegetables and other edibles. Well, the folks at Smart Pots have added a new product to their lineup, perfect for building the healthiest soil imaginable for your garden by composting. It's the Smart Pot Compost Sack, a large 100-gallon fabric bag that's lightweight yet extremely durable and lasts for years. It can hold 12 cubic feet of pure compost. This rugged fabric is entirely porous, containing many micropores that allow for air circulation and drainage. It's easy to start a compost pile with the Smart Pot Compost Sack. Just open the sack, set it on level ground, and start adding your compostable materials, grass clippings, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and more, as well as fallen leaves, straw, and shredded paper. Next, place the optional cover over the sack. That's all there is to it. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. You can find the location nearest you at their website, and you can buy it online from Smart Pots. Just visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Do it at checkout from the Smart Pots store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots' lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers and their new compost sack. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We're talking with Milt McGiffin. He's an extension specialist at UC Riverside, a specialist on biochar. He's been talking about the benefits of biochar, but there is the possibility of some drawbacks, including the translocation of harmful gases to plant roots.
There's been different studies about gas evolution by biochar, but I don't know of anything that's quite like what you described. You must be referring to a particular study. So what study is it you must have read?
The study I did take a look at before we started our chat was from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where they did a study called Using Biochar as a Soil Amendment for Sustainable Agriculture.
Okay.
And they point out that in their summary that, yes, there is a lot of value to using biochar, especially as far as saving money on fertilizers and improving the soil. But there may be, and they weren't positive on this, but there may be some chemical contaminants that biochar usually contains small amounts of phytotoxic and potentially carcinogenic organic compounds, such as PAHs, which I believe are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Therefore, a full environmental risk assessment is necessary before widespread adoption for biochar as a soil amendment can be recommended, according to their report.
That's the only time I've ever heard somebody say you need a full-scale risk assessment of biochar. The truth is, we're kind of heading that way with fertilizers in general anyway. You could get certain contaminants depending on what you make biochar from and how you're making it. Generally speaking, it's not been much of a problem. Like I said, if you do get biochar from someone, it's not going to be pure carbon or what we would think of as pure biochar. By law in the state of California, if you want to put on your bag that this is biochar and you want to sell it to somebody that way, it's got to be at least 60% carbon. So then technically the rest of that could be ash, and the ash could have a variety of different things in it. It would really mostly depend on what the feedstock was and then how you made it. The ash also could be good. Things like potassium. You do the potash test. The reason it's called the potash test is it goes back to the old days when they got potash from wood ash. So that extra ash in there could add a lot of potassium to your soil, but it wouldn't be biochar. So you might have those problems. But beyond that, that's really out there as far as it having a toxic, an effect like that. You could make it in theory from feedstocks where maybe you had a lot of painted wood or something like that, and I could see you would have a problem. But otherwise, we really haven't seen that.
One source of biochar that has a lot of promise are the millions of dead trees we now have in California's mountains due to the drought. And of course, farmers are always churning up old orchards to plant new orchards and vineyards. So there's a lot of potential as far as a source for the biochar, isn't there?
Yeah, it's kind of a nice marriage because we don't know what we're going to do with all this excess wood. And if you drive through the Central Valley these days, you can see there's places where there's acres of old trees or whatever piled up in just big piles. And you can't, burning's very restricted in the valley these days. So what you're going to do with this waste wood's a good question. And then you have essentially a tinderbox up there in the Sierras because you have many dead trees from the years of drought. They're hard to get to. They can't really lumber them out. Apparently they're not good for lumber, or at least the cost to take them out is prohibitive. So the idea of turning all that into biochar is very attractive as well. And then there's the other thing that any of the other waste methods of doing something with wood, it's eventually going to end up as being carbon dioxide, and that, of course, contributes to global warming. So with biochar, it's a way of converting the wood into something that would actually help the soil and also sequester carbon for a long, long time and take it out of the atmosphere.
Using biochar would, of course, be a sustainable practice. Is it an organic practice?
Yes. Everything you use, the short answer to is it organic or not is you need to talk to your certifier, because that's really the person whoever's certifying your field is the one that's going to make that determination. But there are a number of biochars that are registered with OMRI and with the USDA organics program. So you would want to work it out before you start using it, whether it's acceptable practice. But there are ones that are perfectly fine for use in organics, and a lot of organic people I know do use it.
Is there much resistance to biochar from the government or the National Resources Conservation Service?
There's a number of people in both of those agencies that are doing things with it. We have a very good person in the governor's office named Mike McGuire that does a lot of things with biochar and has been very helpful to us. We've worked with NRCS people on biochar. They have not given it a ringing endorsement, that would be fair to say. And they've not included it in the Healthy Soils program. To them, they feel it's still a little too risky. It hasn't been proven enough. To me, it's been used for centuries. It's as uniform as compost is. So to me, I would just rate it pretty much the same as compost. It as far as safety of practice, that it's going to depend on who's making it and where you get it. But if you follow reasonable procedures, it's going to be fine. And we know that it has very good benefits for the soil. So to me, it should be included in that group. But it is new for us. We haven't been using it very long, maybe a decade or so. So I kind of get it. But they have worked with us at different times.
Are you optimistic about the future of biochar?
Yes, for the simple reason that there's only so many ways you can dispose of organic waste. And when you start doing the math on how you're going to dispose of this waste, where you're going to put it, are you going to contribute to the greenhouse gas problem, or are you going to decrease the greenhouse gas problem? Biochar starts looking pretty good. It may be a while, but it does look good. And we are seeing people do it. We start seeing people getting the equipment to just do it right on their own farm. If this ever got subsidized by the government as something to use, maybe subsidize it under a greenhouse gas reduction program or something like that, it would really take off. The problem with it is there just isn't a lot of money. That's basically where you are. And that's generally true of all the waste products. You don't see a lot of research and other things in the compost either for that simple reason. There just isn't a base of funding to do it. But when you start doing the math on logically, what are you going to do with these waste products? Biochar stands up really well.
We've been talking with Milt McGiffin. He's an extension specialist at UC Riverside. I think we'll call him Dr. Biochar.
Jeez, that's lovely.
He's optimistic about the future of biochar as a soil amendment to decrease fertilizer use as well as improve the quality of soil. And it has a bright future.
There's a lot of sources for information on biochar, but probably the best clearinghouse for all of them is the International Biochar Initiative. So if you just Google IBI or International Biochar Initiative, you'll eventually come to their webpage. They have a lot of white papers. They review the scientific literature every month. They have experts on there. They do webinars. If you join and become a member, you get access to the webinars, things like other things that other people don't. But there's a lot of free stuff there too. So just by doing that, you'll find them. There's a number of other sources on the web, and I do a biochar blog, which anybody's welcome to join in on. Probably going to IBI is your best one-stop shopping place for information on biochar.
Milt McGiffin, thanks for a few minutes of your time.
My pleasure.
It's harvest time for one of my favorite fruits to grow, the Japanese persimmon. This versatile, beautiful, nutritious, and tasty fruit makes for a great holiday gift as well. In Friday's Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, Warren Roberts of the UC Davis Arboretum tells us all about the Japanese and American persimmons. In the newsletter, we have cultivation tips as well as a recipe for drying persimmons, and that makes for an outstanding holiday gift. For current newsletter subscribers, look for the Persimmon Primer podcast and newsletter in the Friday, December 2nd edition of the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. It's in your email, or you can start a subscription. It's free. Find the link in today's show notes or sign up at the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. This next chat involves roof rats, and it'll be particularly useful for those of you with large yards or acreage or even a small farm in which you have a large orchard. And for those of you suburban dwellers who might have a few citrus trees, well, you know the damage that rats can do to that fruit. But it's not just the fruit. Roof rats especially can girdle your backyard citrus trees, dramatically shortening their lifespan. If your yard is large or your yard is small, and you have roof rats, we've got the tips, courtesy of University of California's Ag and Natural Resources Farm Advisor, Rachel Long. We recorded this a few years ago, right after a rainy winter, too. You know that a lot of homeowners are getting concerned about who's eating my citrus. And it's not just eating the fruit, it's just eating the rinds, which is very unusual. And some of the culprits being traced back to include roof rats. Well, guess what? Roof rats are now in orchards. They're in pistachio and other nut orchards. They're burrowing and nesting in the ground, chewing on irrigation lines, causing extensive damage, and a lot more. We're talking with Rachel Long, UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor based in Woodland. And Rachel, why aren't these roof rats in roofs? What are they doing in the field? How did they get there?
Good. That's a good question. And so roof rats they just live everywhere. They're very opportunistic, and when they find a food resource, they'll just go for it. So this year in particular has been a really a big year. It's the year of the rat, certainly, and all of these rodents do have cyclical populations, and so some years we just do get outbreaks of voles, or we get outbreaks of roof rats and other rodents. And I think what happened is last year was such a wet winter, and we had tons of weeds that were growing everywhere, producing a lot of seeds, and just provided ideal food resources for that roof rat. And as a result, their populations just rapidly built up. I mean, these roof rats, each female can have 3 to 5 litters per year and 5 to 8 young. And so that could be like 40 offspring per rat. And so you can just see that how quickly a couple of rats can build up to hundreds in a short time.
Well, you've been the pest detective on this one. So talk a little bit how you came to the conclusion it was roof rats, because I would imagine that the first suspect would be rodents or squirrels.
Right, I know. That's what I thought too. So when I got a call to look at a pistachio orchard, I just thought for sure it's going to be ground squirrels, because that's usually what it is. And went out there and just didn't see any ground squirrels. Okay, so ground squirrels are diurnal, so they're active during the day, and just didn't see any. And when I looked at these holes in the ground, they were also way too small for a ground squirrel. So ground squirrel holes will be about 4 inches or more in diameter. And then you usually see a squirrel somewhere around it. But there was no squirrel, and these holes were about 2 to 3 inches in diameter with a little bit of, piles of nuts around it. And so I knew that it could not have been a deer mice or voles, because it was too big for that. The deer mice and voles tend to be 1 to 2 inches in diameter, and these were 3, and ground squirrels are 4. So I just was really scratching my head going, what on earth is this? Because it just was very confusing, because it was just somewhere in between. And so I thought about rats, but I just didn't know what a roof rat would be doing underground, burrowing underground. And so did talk to a colleague, and she assured me that roof rats in the country can burrow underground and nest underground. So they're above ground and nest ground, and of course nocturnal at night. So that's why I didn't see any.
For people who grew up on Bugs Bunny cartoons, they may have thought rabbits might have been the culprit in this situation, but actually rabbits don't dig burrows, do they?
No, they don't. So that was the question, is we actually put out a game camera as well, because we thought, well, maybe we could pick something up. But all we picked up were rabbits and birds. I mean, these roof rats are just sneaky. They're really smart, and they hide. And basically, if you don't see anything but you see the damage, then suspect rats. But rabbits, like jackrabbits and cottontails, they don't dig and burrow underground. I mean, they may just sort of like create a little nest like in thatch and such, but they're not digging and burrowing underground.
And then you have the case of citrus trees, and I understand in some situations the roof rats are nesting in the citrus trees, which must be quite a surprise to anybody out there picking fruit.
Wouldn't that be awful to reach in and have a rat jump out at you? So roof rats, they're opportunistic, and if you have cover year round, like an orange tree, then that can form just this perfect protection for the roof rats during the wintertime. Unlike something like a pistachio orchard or almonds, where the leaves drop in the wintertime, and so they don't have any cover, and that's probably why then they'll go underground and burrow and nest underground. But in citrus trees, they will nest in the tree itself, and what we also see is that not only do they, feed on the fruit, and typically you'll just find like sometimes the whole and then the entire inside of the fruit is eaten out, and you're just left with a shell. And same with pomegranates. There's been damage by rats in pomegranates. But the worrisome thing about rats in like orange trees is what they're doing is they're actually stripping the bark off of limbs of trees. And so there's, a sweetness to that. Basically, the bark has the sugar conducting part of the tree, and so the rats are feeding on that. But when they strip it, they're girdling the tree, and so you can still have water conducting up and down, but when you take off the bark, it just basically girdles the tree. And so a lot of the trees that rats are nesting and feeding in then have branches that are dying back, and that's a problem because then you lose production for years.
Have you seen any evidence in a mixed planting situation of the roof rats basically following the crops? When they're done with citrus, they'll move to the next crop that's ripening, be it a nut crop or another fruit crop?
Certainly they can move around in fields, and we've seen that. I see that more in something like an alfalfa field, where if you disc the field, then the rodents will just, of course, they're going to move out. So you're going to have gophers and voles that are just like dispersing everywhere. And I think that you have two things that you probably have. Certainly some natural mortality when the food resource declines, then the rat population will go down. But I definitely think that they're moving too. I have a colleague that told me he caught something like in Woodland that he caught something like, I don't know, like 50 rats so far in the last 6 months in his backyard. And I'm like, Lordy, that's a lot. And so I think they do disperse, and once the food is gone, then they'll move somewhere else.
The University of California Ag and Natural Resources Department put out a publication about 4 years ago called Managing Roof Rats and Deer Mice in Nut and Fruit Orchards. What is the difference between a roof rat and a deer mouse?
So the roof rat is big, and much bigger than a mouse, and but they both can do damage in orchards. So again, the roof rat, the hole will be about 3 inches, whereas the deer mouse, much smaller, like a house mouse, and the holes will be 1 to 2 inches in the ground. But they both actually can cause damage. The roof rats really do move up and down trees and are feeding, on the tree and on the fruit. And then in the ground, they're just burrowing underground, not necessarily causing any damage underground. But the deer mice, they're everywhere too, and they can actually scramble up and down trees and also feed on like nuts, on almonds, both in the trees and also on the ground. So that kind of surprised me that that actually deer mice can go up and down trees. And I'm always surprised by the number of wildlife that does move around and go up and down on trees as well. Like sometimes I see lizards in trees, and I'm like, what are you doing up there? So yeah, so wildlife actually, the mice and rodents and rats can move around and certainly cause damage to tree crops.
And it's rather expensive. I know there was a study done, I think back in the year 2000, about the cost per acre that deer mice can do, and they pegged it at over $20 per acre to almond orchards in Fresno County due to deer mice damage.
Right. So they can certainly be damaging. The critical issue here is that what I really wanted to let people know about is how to identify these different rodents out in our crops, so that we can get a jump on them early and control them early before outbreaks occur. So that was my intent on putting out a news alert on the rats, was just to say, hey, this is what the damage looks like. Recognize it early. If you can, just use snap traps to catch those rodents and keep them out, keep those populations low. Because once you get a massive infestation in there, then you can really get a lot of damage, and then control becomes incredibly challenging. So this is just really a heads up that rodents are out there, and just keep an eye on them and know how to look for the signs of their activity, and then control them early on to prevent damage. And I always suggest also, like barn owl boxes are good to put up for helping to control gophers, and barn owls will also feed on rats. So they can take a lot of rodents and help us out naturally. So that's one suggestion, is to put up a barn owl box and use your snap traps and just monitor and know what's out there.
We have more with UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor Rachel Long on how to control roof rats coming up. The weather may not be perfect for outdoor gardening right now, but it's perfect for planning your 2023 garden. Now's the time to plan the what and the where of what you want to plant for the future. And to help you along, it pays to visit your favorite independently owned nursery on a regular basis throughout the fall and winter just to see what's new. And coming soon to that nursery near you is Dave Wilson Nursery's excellent lineup of farmers market favorites, great tasting, healthy fruit and nut varieties. They'll already be potted up and ready to be planted. And we're also talking about a great selection of antioxidant-rich fruits, such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, goji berries, grapes, kiwi, mulberries, gooseberries, figs, and pomegranates. Wholesale grower Dave Wilson Nursery has probably the best lineup of great tasting fruit and nut trees of any grower in the United States. Find out more at their website, davewilson.com. And while you're there, check out all the videos they have on how to plant and grow all their delicious varieties of fruit and nut trees. Plus, at davewilson.com, you can find the nursery nearest you that carries Dave Wilson's plants. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. Well, let's talk about some less toxic methods for controlling roof rats and deer mice. How effective is flooding, if at all?
Oh, well, for certainly for gophers and for ground squirrels, it definitely helps to suppress the rodents. But now we've really shifted a lot towards the drip irrigation and the subsurface drip, and so there you do have rodent problems because you can't flood them out, and that's why you have to certainly get in there early and manage them, and certainly trapping works well.
And that brings up another added cost if you're fighting a rodent problem like that, is that drip irrigation tubing becomes a target of thirsty rodents.
Right. Oh, yeah, they do. And in particular, sometimes after harvest, like a sunflower seed crop for that hybrid seed that you're producing, that after harvest and everything is so dry, you do get some cracks in the soil, and then you have seed out there, and you have voles and deer mice and house mice that are incredibly opportunistic, and they just race out and they're feeding on that seed, and they drop into the holes, into the cracks, and feed on that drip line. So and then they cause little leaks that then have to be repaired. So and that's costly, actually trying to fix all those leaks. So it is a challenge, and one of my colleagues is sort of looking at ways to put a little bit of water in the line maybe after harvest just to seal up those cracks and keep the rodents from dropping down and feeding on and nibbling on those lines, because fixing these rodent leaks and those drip lines is expensive and time consuming.
So you mentioned flooding as a possible control for certain rodent pests, and you mentioned snap traps for roof rats and deer mice. Are there any other less toxic alternatives?
Well, so you do have traps for gophers as well, and there's a lot of work being done on gopher control in particular, and ground squirrel control, and they have these different units that like carbon dioxide or something, just that goes down the hole and takes care of these rodents. So there are options for many of our rodent pests, and some of these are registered for organic control as well. I wish there were more options. Some people talk about like cats and releasing cats. My concern about cats certainly is that they eat everything. So while they may eat some rodents, they're going to eat birds and lizards and any like snakes or anything out there as well. So that concerns me that if people are promoting cats, they're not specific on the on rodents. So I wouldn't go that route. But certainly the traps. And some people use barriers. They'll like put a fence down and bury it so that and put it like a foot above ground so so gophers and such can't go in, get in. Certainly for some habitat plantings or plants, they'll put something around the root so that it protects it more from from rodents. You've got tree tubes. So there's multiple ways of trying to control the rodents.
So when it comes to roof rats, though, there are limited options if you want to try to avoid rodenticides.
Right. But except for, because, the big thing is with roof rats and rats in general, is they are smart. They're very clever. They're shy of anything new, and they're very wary. So the roof rats are challenging. And so essentially, the best thing certainly for homeowners, I would say, is your snap traps, and try that for maybe a few local infestations on a farm. But if you've got an outbreak and you're getting damaged, then you need to go to the bait stations up in the trees for managing the rodents. But that said, you've really got to be careful and know when you can use it, and because you can't use it in season for controlling the rodents. So that's something to really watch for. And before it gets to that level, that it is really important to think about our wildlife and the natural control that you can get out there by birds and raptors like the hawks and also the barn owls, and to try to do the local trapping to keep those rats under control. But some years it's just one of the worst outbreaks of rats that we've had in a long time, in many years, and so it's in years like this where you do see a lot of damage, then you do need to be proactive and protect your trees.
And if you want more information about barn owls, for example, and barn owl houses, University of California has some great resources at the UC ANR page, and check that out. Also, managing roof rats and deer mice in nut and fruit orchards, that's available as well from UC ANR. So check those out online as well. Well, it's the year of the rat.
It certainly is this year, and there's always the year of something. And last year it was the year of the vole. I had so many voles out here in the country. It was unbelievable. And now we've moved on, and it's the year of the rat.
Well, hopefully next year won't be grasshoppers.
I hope not. Yeah, I haven't seen those, and just knock on wood that it's going to be a quiet year.
All right. Rachel Long, UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor based in Woodland. Thanks for a few minutes of your time.
Well, you're most welcome.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net, or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.